Chapter 4 of Finn the Wolfhound by Alec John Dawson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4, First Steps. The sturdy, kindly plebeian sheepdog proved an admirable foster-mother, diligent, thorough, and forgetful of nothing, not even of her own needs and well-being, though it was evident that these were served from quite unselfish motives, and obliged to take a secondary place in all her thoughts. It was particularly well for Finn that the sheepdog proved so sterling a soul. For though he naturally knew and cared nothing about it all, Finn received less attention during the next few days from the master and the mistress than they were wont to give their canine families. Of course, the foster was properly fed and given exercise and otherwise looked after. But the master did not smoke his pipe in the coach-house, and the mistress of the kennels did not sit on the side of the bed for half an hour at a time, and stroke the foster's ears while admiring her nursling, as certainly would have happened in normal circumstances. The master's doubts about poor Tara's health had been fully justified. Her puppies were thin and inclined to be ailing, and she herself was only just saved by means of scrupulous care and attention, and the use of other drugs besides externally applied belladonna, from a severe illness. Meantime another foster was telegraphed for, and an hour after this newcomer's arrival one of Tara's pups died. The master had no time to be greatly concerned about this, by reason of his anxiety regarding Tara herself. He felt that another bout of the illness, in which she had nearly lost her life in the early days, would almost certainly be fatal, and the steps he took to stave this off kept him very busy. In addition to this, a carpenter had to be set to work in a great hurry to put together a suitable bed for the new foster-mother in a shed in the orchard. Fortunately the weather was very favourable, and the two puppies taken from Tara soon picked up their lost ground when they were established with their foster, an active cross-bred spaniel retriever. But Finn in the coach-house knew nothing of all this. Apart from anything else, he was still perfectly blind. Also, he had as much of the best kind of nourishment as he was capable of absorbing, and was watched over and cared for and ministered to by the loyal little sheepdog quite as scrupulously as a human baby is attended. There never was a truer saying than that blood will tell. But not only is a mongrel mother's milk rich and strong, if she is a healthy, well cared-for animal, but also her care of her young is slavish and unremitting. Her nerves are never overstrained, she is not unduly sensitive, she knows how to economize vital energy. There is much difference between her life and temperament and that of a champion-bred aristocrat and winner of prizes at shows, as there is between the life and temperament of a society belle and a Devonshire dairymaid. In the sheepdog's case, a healthy appetite waited always upon plentiful meals. She had but one whelp to care for, and of that one she hardly ever lost sight, even when sleeping. If the blind, foolish Finn wriggled from her side in mid-most night, he ran no risk of taking cold, for if the sheepdog did not see him, then her instinct, keener in the plebeian than in the dog of high degree, just as nerves and sentiment are keener in the aristocrat, woke her within the minute, and up she got to nose her erring infant back to sleep and warmth and safety. On the evening of his 10th day in the world, Finn was still perfectly blind. His eyes as yet showed no signs of opening. This rather surprised the master when he looked in before shutting up for the night. He was quite easy in his mind now about Tara, who was almost well again, to all appearances, and lay contentedly in the den all day, having apparently forgotten not only her illness, but its causes and her puppies. She was rather listless and lackadaisical, but seemed to be well content, so that she could lie within sight of the master and dream. And now the Master was chatting with the sheep-dog foster, after having had a good look at Finn, and after shutting up for the night. "But perhaps it is well he is still blind, for your sake, old lady," said he to the foster. "He will be a bit of a handful for you before you're done with him, I fancy; and the sooner he begins to find his own way about, the longer he will torment you. Never mind, little bitch, you must do your best for Finn, for he's a great pup." And a great pup he assuredly was, to be sprawling across that little sheep-dog's sandy flank. He covered pretty nearly as much space as a whole litter of her own kind would have occupied. His pink pads looked monstrous now. His timbers were quite twice the thickness you would have expected to find them, and his shapeless, abundantly nourished body was very nearly as broad at the haunch as it was long from neck to tail. His flat, black nose was remarkably broad, in spite of the unusual length of the black-marked muzzle, and the Master, who had studied Wolfhound puppies very closely, seemed particularly pleased about this. Finn's corners, so to say, were practically black. His body as a whole was of a steely, brindle grey, but the centre of the back of his tail and its tip were almost black, and so were his little podgy hocks, knees, muzzle, brows, if he could be said to have any, and the hair over his gristly shoulder bones. The Master swung his hurricane lamp high for a last look at Finn and the foster. "You certainly are a marvel of size, my son, but I wonder you don't begin to open those eyes of yours, I must say. Let's hope they're very dark. Good night, little shepherd." The light of Finn's 12th day on earth had already filled the coach-house through its back windows when the sheep-dog stirred next morning and yawned. The slight sound and the movement woke Finn, and automatically he burrowed vigorously after his breakfast without an instant's hesitation. Presently he emerged with milky nose from the foster's flanks, and meandered forth to be licked and made comfortable. The licking ended, the foster rose and stepped off the bed to stretch her limbs. Finn rolled rockingly over on his back, and then staggered up and on to his absurdly large and spreading feet. Then he backed sideways among the straw, like a crab. Then he tried to rub one eye with one of his mushroom-like forefeet, and failing abjectly in that, fell plump on his nose. Staggering to his feet again, Finn turned his face once toward the broad sunbeam that divided the coach-house in two parts from the side window, and then, as though tried beyond endurance, opened wide his jaws and bleated forth his fright and distress to the world, so that the patient little foster-mother was obliged to cut her constitutional short and hop back to bed, lolling a solicitous tongue and making queer comforting noises in her throat. But for some several minutes the puppy absolutely refused to be comforted, and when the Master came in an hour or so later, he understood at a glance what Finn's trouble was, though the casual observer might well have thought there was no particular change in his circumstances. The fact was, Finn had sustained a real shock, and his perturbation about it lasted for nearly half an hour, after which it retired, overcome by youthful curiosity. Finn had suddenly awakened to the fact that he was no longer blind. He had stepped, at one uncertain stride, into a seeing life. It was like being born again, and that with faculties matured and sharpened by nearly a fortnight's life in the world. It really was no trifling adventure for Finn, this discovery of a new and very wonderful sense, which had come simply with the parting of the lids that covered his black-brown eyes. He spent practically the whole of that day testing this new sense which had come to him with so great a shock. For instance, he found that if he crawled a certain distance from the foster in one direction, the air before him became whiter and whiter, until at last he stubbed his toes and his nose against it. And that was his first acquaintance with walls. Then, when he crawled in another direction, he came presently to a ledge several inches in height, and when, as the result of nearly Herculean efforts, he had raised his fat body upon that ledge, the floor beyond jumped up and hit him very hard, and left him helpless as a turtle on its back, till the foster came and lifted him back to bed in her jaws. That was how he learned that it was not wise for very small pups to climb over the edges of beds. Towards evening, when many useful lessons had been learned, and the pup was beginning to swagger over the advantage given him by his new-found sense, in the matter of picking and choosing feeding places, and demanding his foster mother's attention by planting one foot on her eye, and so forth, Finn came to the conclusion that this new power he had was upon the whole a remarkably fine thing, and a jolly gift, even if it did keep one awake and lead to considerable exhaustion, and then he shut up his little black-brown eyes, and, well sheltered by the foster's right hind leg and tail, went fast asleep and dreamed of warm milk. From this point onward Finn's progress was rapid. Whereas till now he had seemed little more than an appendage of the sheep-dog foster mother, he now rapidly developed a personality, and a very masterful one, of his own. His eyes, which were quite as dark as the master had desired them to be, were idle only when he slept, and the same might be said of every part of him. He grovelled most industriously during all his waking hours, until such time as his podgy legs had hardened sufficiently to bear his weight, with many falls of course, and then he began to scurry about on his feet. His usual style of progression at this point was to take from 2 to 4 abrupt, jerky strides, rather with the air of a fussy and corpulent old gentleman who had to catch a train, and then to subside in a confused lump, on chest and nose, with tail wagging angrily in mid-air. This was not so annoying to the grey pup as one might suppose, because, though generally in a hurry, he always forgot his intended destination by the time he had taken 3 steps towards it, and therefore a sudden halt at the 4th seemed reasonable enough, and quite an agreeable diversion. During the 3rd week of his life, the weather being very fine, Finn, with the other pups, was treated to long sun baths in a little fenced-in square of gravel which was covered with deodorized sawdust. These sun baths were extremely good for the pups, and provided pleasant periods of rest and relaxation for the foster mothers, who, though never allowed to see each other, were each within smelling distance of the pups, one upon one side and one on the other. A huge dry bullock's shin bone was put into the sun bath on a piece of matting, and this was a source of great interest to the pups, whose little white teeth were now as sharp as needles, a fact known only too well to their respective foster mothers. Finn's favourite amusement was to lie straddled along this bone and defy the other pups to touch it. He would give hard-breathing little snorts, which he meant for growls, when one of the other pups began to nuzzle the bone, and at times these snorts would be vehement enough to make him lose his balance and roll helplessly off the bone onto the ground. Then the other 3 pups would straddle across his tubby body and snort defiance at him, each with a paw planted victoriously in his protuberant stomach or on his broad chest. On Finn's 21st morning he spent the better part of half an hour in the lap of the mistress of the kennels, learning to lap warm milk and water. First of all he learned to suck the milky tip of the mistress's little finger. Then gradually his nose was made to follow the little finger-tip into the milk, and then, one way and another, he consumed during that first lesson about a tablespoonful of milk. In the afternoon he was kept for perhaps 2½ hours from the foster mother, and then he, with the other pups, made great progress in the art of lapping. though they were all glad to approach the feeding question in a more serious and practical manner on being returned to their foster mothers. Still, they had learned something, and the succeeding lessons of each following day brought quick familiarity and facility. In fact, the trouble with Finn, after 2 or 3 days, was that in his lusty eagerness for nourishment he generally risked the suicide's end by stumbling forward and plunging his whole face in the milk. His one notion of a safeguard against this danger was to plant one or both of his tubby forelegs in the dish, a course which always brought him rebuke from the mistress of the kennels. Towards the end of the 4th week these lessons in lapping became real meals, and the milk so consumed was always fortified with a thickening of some cereal rich in phosphates, besides minute doses of precipitated phosphate of lime, intended to stiffen the gristly leg bones of these heavy pups, and increase bone development. The foster mothers had been taking this and communicating it in their milk all along. This was the period in which the maternal feelings of the foster mothers were submitted to the most severe strain. Finn's milk-white teeth, and his toe-nails too, were sharp as pins, and used with great strength and vigour. Naturally he entertained no unkind feelings for his loving little foster mother, but from sheer ignorance and riotous good living he gave her a good deal of pain. Some dog mothers would have warned him about this pretty sharply, but not so the little sheep dog. She never even growled, when after feeding till he could feed no more, the insolent grey whelp would pound and paw on her soft dugs, and tug at them with his sharp teeth in sheer wantonness, till they were a network of red scars and scratches. The most the gentle plebeian little mother would do would be to lie flat after a while to protect her dugs, and that for the puppy's own sake, a movement which always brought Finn galumphing over her shoulder to bite her ears and paw her nose, and otherwise seek to provoke breaches of the peace. A riotous, overbearing, disorderly rascal was Finn at this stage. On the morning which ended Finn's 5th week in the world, all the puppies were solemnly weighed in the kitchen scales, which were brought into the coach-house for that purpose. The master stood by with a note-book, and these are the weights he recorded: fawn bitch 10 3/4 pounds, grey bitch 11 1/4 pounds, fawn dog 12 pounds 3 ounces, Finn 14 pounds 4 ounces. In other words, at the age of 5 weeks, and while still a suckling pup, Finn weighed as much as some prize-winning fox terriers, and that breed when fully developed, in point of size, though not of course shapely or set. After corresponding with other breeders, the master was confirmed in his already expressed conviction that thus far Finn was a maker and breaker of records. During the week following this weighing, Finn was only allowed to visit his foster mother once for half an hour or so in each day. But the meals he lapped from a dish in his own blundering way included broth now, as well as milky foods, and he still slept with the foster at night. During the next week, in fine dry July weather, all 4 puppies were gambolling together in the orchard from 6 in the morning till 6 at night, and never saw the foster mothers till they were tired out with their day-long play and ready for the night's sleep. The master and the mistress took their own lunch and tea in the orchard at this time, and a table and chairs were kept under a big oak tree for this purpose. In and out among the legs of these chairs and the table the Wolfhound pups played boisterously hour by hour, till fatigue overtook them with capricious suddenness, and they would fall asleep in the midst of some absurd antic, and in any odd position that came handy. Then one of the pups, usually Finn, would open his eyes and yawn, realize once more how good life was, and plunge forthwith upon his still sleeping brothers and sisters, tumbling them triumphantly into the midst of a new romp before they knew whether they were on their heads or their heels. A twig, a leaf, or a stone would be endowed with the attributes of some cunning and fierce quarry, to be stalked, run down, and finally torn in sunder with marvellous heroism, with reckless, noisy valour. The sun shone warm and sweetly over all, there beside the immemorial Sussex Downs. Life and the dry old earth were very, very good, if only one's breath did not give out so soon, and one's forelegs had not so annoying a trick of doubling up. And then, what was that rascally fawn pup rushing for? The mistress with the 4 little dishes and the big basin? Another meal? Here goes! Bother! I certainly should have reached her first, if I hadn't turned that somersault over the fawn pup. That was how it seemed to Finn, whose life was one long happy play and swagger at this time. But there were moments of a kind of seriousness, too, in which Finn had glimpses of real life. That very night, or rather late afternoon, Finn discovered that he could bark, more or less as grown-up dogs bark. True, his first, second, and third barks proved too much for his unstable equilibrium, and he rolled over on his side in emitting the noble sounds. But the 4th time he leaned against the table leg under the oak tree, and on that occasion was able to stand proudly to observe the paralyzing effect of his performance upon the others of his family, who sat round him on their podgy haunches in a respectfully wide circle, and marvelled fearfully at his robust prowess. They had all yapped before, but this deep, resonant bark, fully 1 in 3 had no crack in it, this was an achievement indeed. After a while the grey bitch pup came and tentatively chewed Finn's backbone, in a vague idea that the sound came from there. When Finn was escorted, prancing drunkenly, to the coach-house that evening after his supper, the little sheep-dog within was just finishing her supper. Finn conceived the notion of showing his foster-mother what he could do, and accordingly swaggered unsteadily into the coach-house, delivering loud barks as he advanced, all up and down the scale. The little sheep-dog, less than twice Finn's size now, raised her nose from the dish and barked angrily in good earnest. Finn rolled forward and sniffed in casual fashion at her dish, whereupon the foster growled at him quite ferociously and shouldered the great whelp out of her way. The master, who was looking on, nodded his head once or twice thoughtfully. "Yes," he said, as Finn sidled off to the bed, rather crestfallen, "I think you may take that as your notice to quit, my son. That's weaning. You've been a good deal on your own lately, you know. Well, I had meant this for your last night as a baby anyhow. But as it is, there, little shepherd, you've been a dear, good little mother, haven't you? 6 weeks now, and as you say, he is a great hulking chap, isn't he? Well, all right. Make it up then, and give him a good-bye lick. I don't think you've much else to give now, anyway, but the warmth of your body." But the good, patient little sheep-dog had already placed herself at the grey whelp's voracious disposal, and he was pounding and tugging away at her in his usual merciless style. Then, when she went dutifully to lick the rascal, he thrust at her strongly with his great strong legs, and the master, who had been standing, smoking and watching, said, "Come along, little shepherd, that's good-bye." And that was the last Finn saw of any foster-mother. That was the end of babyhood and the beginning of childhood for Finn. He slept alone that night, and found it rather awesome during the few minutes in which his eyes were open, between the last lapped meal at 10 o'clock and the first of the next day, when the master came to him at 5:30. The master held that if you would breed a really exceptional hound, you must be prepared to take really exceptional trouble over the task, since a chance lost in the first half-year of your hound's life is lost for good and all. End of Chapter 4.